Welcome to this month's kind of a Fast 60, we're going to call it a Fast 60 presentation about private equity and preparing ourselves for the mindset shift to be a COO in a PE-backed organization. Some of you on the call may have experience with this. Some of you may be preparing for this type of experience, but today's presentations, I think is going to be very helpful in preparing mindsets. So that's a large part of our focus today. So again, welcome everyone. If you would please just drop your name, company, where you're located, and what's your experience in working in a PE-backed organization. And we're going to dive in here in just a second. Give it another minute, and we'll get things kicked off. How are you, Tasha? Are you still there?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Great.
Loud and clear. All right. All right, let me get started with an introduction first and foremost. So, Natasha joins us. She's leads the CEO COO practice at ECA Partners, which is an executive search firm focused on PE-backed talent in their portfolio company. So she's got a ton of experience of understanding what it takes to be successful in that environment. She's worked as an executive in privately held healthcare company and has gone through 2 PE-backed transitions herself, including a strategic acquisition at Cardinal Health. And then after 11 years in healthcare, Natasha has been working with private equity companies across the investment life cycle, everywhere from due diligence, acquisition to post-merger value creation for the past 5 years. We're excited to have Natasha here. Natasha, are you ready? I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, and really appreciate the intro there. I think I'm very different than most executive search people that you would meet because most people in this industry have their career recruiters. So they've been doing that their entire career, whereas I'm more of a former operator turned executive search. So I've led commercial teams. I've been in high-level individual contributor roles. And when Chuck and Fiona and I were kind of talking about the topic that might be relevant here, I thought it would be helpful to share kind of the experience because, the company that I was in was very much a family-owned business. The founder used to bring his labs into the work every day. We very much a founder-led environment, and going from that in the middle of Ohio into a PE-backed environment where you've got suits coming in from New York talking about EBITDA and other initiatives that we had never really heard before. It was quite a transition to go through that process. And so some of the things that I prepared for today is really designed to help you if your company does become private equity backed, if you're considering a PE backed company to go work for, or you're just looking to see how you can apply some of the fundamentals here to the business that you're in, which can be very applicable as well. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. We're going, well, let me see. We might run into some. Oh, there we go. Okay, we'll see if this works. This is the high level agenda. What I really want to talk about first is the mindset. What's the business that private equity is in? So you can understand where it is that they're coming from and describe the ecosystem. I understand from some of the survey results that some of you have PE-backed experience and some of you do not. So this is going to be a probably overly simplified version, but it should give you enough context to understand where you might fit as a puzzle piece in that ecosystem, which will definitely help you as an executive. I hosted a dinner last fall in Boston with a group of private equity executives, and the CEO of a PE firm came and presented on talent and how they look at their portfolio companies through the CEO spot. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is he's an industry veteran for many decades now. He talked about how in 1990, there were less than 100 private equity firms that were out there today. And today there's over 4,000 in the US alone of private equity firms. And what's interesting is a lot of those private equity firms are in what's called low mid-market, and their investment thesis or their how they go to market is that they love to be the first institutional capital in a founder-led business. So if you're currently in a founder-led business, chances are your CEO is probably getting calls from private equity teams or getting inbounds for potential acquisition targets. I understand a lot of you are also in the COO spot. This is one of the hardest roles to recruit for because it can mean so many different things, but it's also one of my favorite roles to recruit for. So I'm going to leverage a framework that I've come across in my experience in recruiting for COOs and how that applies to what you do today. And then if we have time, I'll share some tips of things that I think are just useful regardless of the role that you're in going forward. Okay. Chuck, can you see my key motivators slide here? Just
Yes, looks
checking.
great.
Great. Also, just to pause, if you have any questions whatsoever, please put them into the chat. I can't actually see the chat because I'm looking at all your faces and my screen. So Chuck is going to do, Chuck and Fiona are going to work at culminating any questions that you have. It's not disruptive at all. I'll pause periodically and see if there are questions. So feel free to just throw those out at any time. This is a grid that I put together. I think the key main things to consider from an executive search perspective, when I'm recruiting, and I think I've done all but one placement in a private equity firm or PE-backed company, a lot of times we're looking for executives who have had PE experience because there's certain toolkits that they have that are different than a privately held company. And the ones that I'll call out here is, do they have a sense of urgency? Private equity is marching to a very specific timeline. There's an exit on the horizon. They need to scale this business up and exit out of it, and time is not on your side. So executives that thrive in these type of high pressure environments are going to be more of your roll your sleeves up executive who is really focused on execution. They lean very heavily on execution, and they have a very high degree of urgency. It's the number one question that comes up when we present a candidate that's not in a PE-backed environment. It's not necessary to have that experience, but can they demonstrate that skill set? The other thing that I'll call out here is that the way that a private equity firm works is once they make that acquisition, they're infusing a significant amount of capital into this portfolio company or this investment. And as a result of that, they want to start to see returns. And as an executive, where I've seen a lot of people maybe stumble along the way, is they don't take a data first approach with everything that they communicate. So being able to have a firm grasp on numbers, if you find yourself in a PE-backed scenario, just because your business got acquired or you've been in one before, the reporting requirements are significantly higher. The number of reports that you're going to need to look at, but also the level of detail in those reports is really demanding. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but it's like essentially, moving with urgency, focus on execution, understanding that there is an exit on the horizon, and that's the unified goal of the entire organization, and that you're leading with data. Okay, so this is my first very oversimplified version of what private equities is. So this is the business that they're in. Private equity is trying to raise capital from limited partners. Sometimes they're called LPs. There are other wealth structures out there that are not called limited partners, but for the sake of today's topic conversation, we'll just keep it simple. So there's a handful of asset categories that are looking to invest their money. And they don't want to invest it in the stock market because they think that they can do better in the private market. So the private equity firm essentially says, hey, we will invest your hundreds of millions of dollars, and we will give you a return within 3 to 5, sometimes 7 years in a more recent environment. And they will go and fundraise for a specific fund. And each of these funds is typically going to have a theme or a purpose to it. So they might raise a fund and once they get to $100 million in committed capital, They might call that their micro cap fund. They're going to invest only in businesses that do 10 to $20 million in top line revenue. Fund two might be, the next one, and they get to $200 million of committed capital. That one might be just focused solely on healthcare. So they're only going to invest in healthcare businesses. Fund three could be all European businesses. So there's some funds out there that only focus on certain geographical sectors. And the PE firm can define the parameters for each of these funds. As they're deploying that capital, they're investing in a series of companies, or what they call a portfolio, to fit into those funds. And once that company gets placed in that fund, that's when the timer starts and they have to be able to exit. So one of the challenges that private equity faces is there's oftentimes a scenario where there's a company that's growing and it's doing really well, but they could probably do even better over the next 18 months. But they have to return the capital to the LPs. Those LPs don't want to wait 20 years to see a return on the hundreds of millions of dollars they've invested. So in some scenarios, they're going to have to exit regardless. And that could be, exiting to another private equity firm. It could be IPOing the business, or exiting to a strategic, which is what I did when I was became under the Cardinal umbrella. So once a private equity firm has identified you as a target company to buy, they're going to go through what's called diligence, deep dive into financial reporting, risk assessment, market assessment. But ultimately, what's going to come out of this is a thesis. So this is the main question they're trying to answer here is what's holding this company back from scaling? Maybe you've been growing 5 or 10% every single year, but what would it take to get this business to grow 20% year over year, 30% year over year? And usually that question is solved with two main things. First is capital, which the private equity firm has. So they're going to give you the capital to invest in that technology, make that acquisition, add more locations. If you're a multi-site, add more locations. The other part of that value creation plan is, and it's always part of the value creation plan, I would say it's up to 50%, sometimes more, is the talent. So a lot of these founders are just amazing in their own right, in that they've built an incredible business that actually survives diligence, which means that it's a very sound business model. But most founders are not experts at building a management team. So it could be their brother-in-law's doing the books and the finances. And so that needs to be upskilled, or they've never had a COO. So a lot of the searches that I do, it's the first time COO, and they're not quite sure how this role is going to fit, but they know that they need this role in order to put the systems and processes in place to be able to scale. What I've listed under the value creation bubble here are some of the main themes that come out of the strategy. So buy and build is we're going to build a complementary, or we're going to buy a complementary business and fold it into your business, and we're going to multiply value as a result of that. Operational excellence, so reducing cost. Financial engineering, probably 15 to 20 years ago, financial engineering represented about 70% of the value creation theme for businesses. Today, it's more 30%. So it's kind of flipped, where now most of the value creation, financial engineering is still a critical component of it, but go to market is actually more important than ever. So one thing that's shifted in private equity is they're having to reach farther into the portfolio companies to understand, what is your digital marketing strategy, or what does the makeup of your sales team look like? And they've never really had to do that historically. So you have, I think one of the challenges with a private equity firm is there's not a lot of people with operator experience that are at the private equity firm. And that's why talent is often a very key theme for value creation, because they need people who have run businesses and have a specific skill set. So I remember when we first announced that we had investors, and we went through this honeymoon period for the first 12 months We had an infusion of capital. We got to buy all the shiny toys, the new technology. We got to hire out a huge sales team. It was a lot of fun, and very little things actually changed in the day-to-day of the organization. The culture didn't really change a lot. And we were just essentially being able to say yes to more things than no. There's a critical point that happens about 12 months when the honeymoon is coming to an end. And the private equity firm says, hey guys, we've given you a significant amount of investment, and now we need to see performance. So we want you to start demonstrating what we're getting as a result of that investment for the first 12 months. And also, what's the trend? How are we knowing, how do we know that we're on track to hit a number or hit that plan so that we can exit from this business and all celebrate? One of the main reasons why being in a PE-backed business can be very attractive is because at this level, you typically are given an equity position. And when you go through an exit, it can do a couple of things for you. One, it's personally financially rewarding. It can be a game changer for your retirement. Some people take a year off and reevaluate, what do I want to do? I want to start my own business, or whatever it is. Other people jump into the PE ecosystem from there, because once you've got an exit under your belt, that's a very specific experience that comes with a unique toolkit that is now incredibly marketable to other businesses who haven't gone through that. Part of their management team has never gone through an exit. If you have that on your background, that is going to be very, very appealing to other businesses, that you're going to be positioned as the guide to lead, essentially, because you've got that experience. Okay, before that's a lot of talking for me. Hopefully most of the value of this is going to really come from your questions. Next, I'm going to talk about how the private equity firm and the portfolio company leadership team interact with each other via the board. But before I shift to that type of a topic, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions about the mechanisms of private equity, the themes of how they invest, how they think about anything. Is there any questions, I guess, that we can pause?
Hi, I'm Chris Arnold from Fred Rogers Productions. I just wanted to ask, at what point in this ecosystem do you find the most risk of an investment going south for a PE firm?
The goal is to identify all of those risks through due diligence. So the deal team, they're kind of dialing for dollars, trying to call founders and drum up pipeline. The diligence team is, once they've met a certain criteria, they fit within the theme of the fund, they're going to have a pretty exhaustive process to identify risk. One of the main ones is looking at the financials of the organization. So a lot of firms, like right now that I know that are PE backed, are looking to exit in a couple of years, and they're actually skilling up their finance team so they can survive a diligence process. So they're really trying to figure out, okay, where are the financials? Where's the cash in this business? And how are we at risk for the business model? Is this an episodic revenue business model, or is it recurring? And is there an opportunity to, if it is episodic, is there an opportunity to bring in a recurring revenue component to it? And then they'll talk to SMEs, they'll engage outside counsel, they'll talk to former CEOs who are in the industry, but they're really, really trying to identify all of the risk through diligence. I think for a lot of executives, when they go through the diligence phase, they kind of like breathe a sigh of relief, like, wow, we just provided them all these things, did all these meetings, all these questions, and they feel that kind of relief for about 1 minute. And then it's, once they make the investment, it's go time again. So it's definitely a sprint, and it's not for the faint of heart. And I always tell people who are kind of interested in private equity, I think the main question is, do you really want to be in a private equity backed business? Because your tenure on average is lower. The management teams do turn over more often than in a privately held business. And that can be a massive opportunity for you as an executive, but it's a risk as well to, I mean, the business and to you personally. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but there can be lots of risks that come up at any phase. in this process. I just think some of the main ones that have happened recently are interest rates. So interest rates put some portfolio companies in a position where their payments on their debt, because debt is how PE funds a lot of their investments, actually took out all of their cash flow. So now they have a cash flow problem, which is a major issue for companies. Tariffs is top of mind for a lot of organizations today. COVID was a major, disruptor in the space. So there's always going to be things that are out there. And I'm actually going to talk about identifying risks in a future slide, but they can come at any point in this life cycle is the short answer. Good question though.
In the PE ecosystem with the multiple funds, on average, how many perform and how many lose? I mean, what's the standard?
Yeah, that varies significantly. So private equity firms love Excel. They love numbers. So they are constantly benchmarking the fund performance against their peers, against their prior history. It's the story they tell to LPs so they can go and raise the next fund. So their first fund is 100 million, their next one's 200. Maybe they're on their sixth fund and they're raising $1 billion fund. The only reason that they can get the credibility to do that is through fund performance. And so they're very eager to demonstrate that and tell that story to the market so that they can continue, ups. And some funds actually don't want to get bigger, but it just really depends. There's a lot of flavors in private equity.
And I'm just going to throw it out there. In an environment, my last company, PE took over TPG. They got rid of the executive team, and basically they just put in the board members as executives that have no experience of how to run a company. And I think they're doing that just as seat warmers because they're going to do a transaction. Have you ever seen that strategy before? Or I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Why would they do it this way?
I think that's a good transition to the next slide here, because to your point, I mean, the challenge with private equity is they're not operators typically. Some have an operating partner model where they will place, an advisor kind of role, but that operating partner is probably managing several portfolio companies. They're not in the office every day and understanding what's going on in the business. And so the way that private equity understands what's going on in the business is really through establishing a board. So the people they typically put on a board are going to be a few members from the private equity firm. They sometimes place an independent board member. I personally always recommend having an independent board member. The CEO is often the chairman of the board, sometimes not. And then they may have a few other members, but they're managing expectations with the board is a very unique skill set. And I'm going to talk through a little bit of that here. But essentially, the outline is the CEO sets the strategy, the vision, the culture. The CEO executes the vision, and the CFO is how the private equity firm is going to really hear the story and the narrative of what's working and what's not and why. So one of the things that is the most important, I think, is as anyone is preparing for a board meeting, some of the things that I've heard people say is bad news first, being very transparent, understand that each board member has a very strong opinion. They're not board members by accident. They're usually very successful people in their own right for a reason. So understanding and building a relationship with each board member one-on-one and understanding their perspective on the portfolio company that you're in. What is the thesis of growth? Because that creates a lot of friction if they're not aligned on the same page. But then also, and I'll talk about this a couple times, always one of the things that probably irritates boards the most is when executives go into those meetings and they have this great plan and the deck and they pontificate on all these, what ifs that could happen, but they don't back it up with data. The board wants to hear the context, but they want to see the number. If you have an idea, how are you going to track if it's successful? If there's a problem, how do you know that that's a problem? So leading with data is the best way, one of the best ways to gain credibility with a board. Now, there are the board does intervene when they feel like the leadership team is not going to get them where they need to be. Or sometimes there's banker involvement. So a banker might sit on a board, especially if the portfolio company is about to break their debt covenants, or not they're not in a good position. Then all of a sudden that we have a new stakeholder in mind. So some of those more distressed or turnaround situations would fall into that category. Does that help? Perfect.
Yeah, it does. That's good clarity of their focuses, but I think their situation is it's just more convoluted. So I don't know. I'm trying to make
Yeah.
sense out of what they're doing and what the strategy is, but I guess time will tell.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's always interesting dynamics with the board. So it's at the end of the day, for me, it's always there, it's a group of people, and the more that you have a relationship with that person, the more they trust you, the more transparency there is, just the better that things can go. And like if the company's on track from a growth perspective, typically the board is very hands off. As you know, the company is getting into a position where they're not hitting profitability metrics, or maybe their EBITDA is going, the opposite direction. So I worked with a company where their EBITDA from 2019 to last year was cut in half. And EBITDA is essentially, are you growing revenue faster than you're growing your cost structure? It's how lean, or that's scale. That's essentially how they know if it's scaling. And so the board gets very involved if EBITDA is not on the right growth trajectory. So, kind of, I don't think you can spend enough time on the data piece, but I was on a call earlier this week with Carlisle, one of the largest and most prestigious firms in this space. And we were ruminating on, what is it that we look for in a first-time CEO? Or what is it that we look for in a first-time COO? And we were just talking about, can this person see the bigger picture? So I remember when I was at the medical supply company and PE came in, and we started making different decisions. And there was very quickly a divide between the legacy employees who really were beating this drum of like, but that's how we've always done things. That's how our clients see our value. That's what makes us different and unique. And then the new form of leadership, which was, our thesis is we need to, we have 40,000 SKUs. We really only need 25,000 in order to maximize our revenue and also reduce cost and reduce complexity in the business. And so I think really making sure if I were going into any type of PE-backed scenario, the first two questions that I would ask are, what's the investment thesis here? Because if you know what the strategy is, it's a lot easier to fall into alignment there. And also, where are we at in this investment? Are we a year from exit? Did they just get invested? Because knowing that, you're going to know, are you coming into an environment where they're in spend mode? Are you coming into an environment where they're in, pullback mode? Right before we exited, I remember they made a lot of decisions that I couldn't understand at the time, but totally make sense now. They cut all travel. They increased goals across the team. And they were really the CFO was really trying to make us look good on the balance sheet so that we could have the best exit possible. And as an equity holder, that ended up being an amazing thing for me. But at the time, I couldn't quite understand it. But now, if I were to go into a business and they're 2 or 1 year away from exiting, that would totally make sense and track to me. I understand why they're doing that. The other thing too is like, can you articulate the fundamentals of the business? Do you really have a firm grasp of the business model and strategically what you're trying to do with your cash, your profitability? We talked about risk factors out there. Private equity, I love private equity. I'm so addicted to the space, and I think it's a lot of fun. I love the energy, the pace, the urgency. But private equity, if I had to pick a spirit animal for them, they would be one of those like nervous Chihuahua dogs that is always shaking. They're always taking risks, right? So they're playing with money, and not just like monopoly money. This is like real money that's very large sums, and they're making big bets. they are always scanning and looking for ways to mitigate and minimize risk. So as an executive, if you come to a board meeting or you come to your executive leadership team meeting and you say, hey guys, here are 2 or 3 things that could be a risk in our business. We should, here's how we would know if it was a risk. And here are some ideas, or maybe we need to brainstorm some ideas of, what would be our crisis response plan in the event of X. So you taking that mindset ahead of time and proactively bringing that it's going to give the warm and fuzzy feeling that your board is looking for, that your CEO is going to cheer you on for like making them look better for that. I think also, I just did a podcast with a just amazing CEO. He was actually a COO at a private equity firm, parachute in as a CEO in a few firms. You can find it on my LinkedIn, but he talks about going into these scenarios with the beginner's mindset. And it's hard to do that when you've been in a business for a long time and all of a sudden you're in a PE-backed business. But to reset and say, okay, how can I look at this business? It is a new business. The idea of how we grow is fundamentally changed. So how can I look at this with a new set of eyes? And he talks about this really compelling story where he was working with a multi-site MRI business, and they implemented real-time data tracking. In the morning, their analyst said, hey, one of the centers hasn't reported. And he goes, oh, that's interesting. They called the president, hey, this center hasn't reported. Do you know why? And they said, no, we have no idea. They called the center and they said, well, we actually ran out of helium, so we can't operate the MRI. And if you can't operate the MRI system, you're losing revenue. But they were able to catch it with real-time data. So I think the other thing here is don't shy away from the reports and look at it as like a burden, but how can you actually use data as your new best friend, as the way that you can gain credibility and help the business avert some of these risk factors? That's going to be what helps you win in interviews for your next role, in promotions, and in setting the company on a track for success for exit. I was interviewing this amazing CEO who's known as a turnaround. So he goes into dumpster fires and makes them profitable and turns them into a successful exit. And I said, gosh, you've done this a number of times, which is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very unique skill set. And I said, what do you think one of the key critical success factors was for you in pulling this off? And what he said really surprised me. But he goes, you should have a closer relationship with your CFO than you do with your spouse. And I don't know if I would completely agree with that. However, there is a significant power in the CFO spot because the private equity firm believes what they say, they believe their data, and they hold the keys to the kingdom that tell the narrative of what's going on in your business through metrics. It's credible. If you try to show metrics or data that conflicts with the CFO, that is one of the fastest ways that you can lose credibility. So really partnering with this person and saying, hey, how can we like work together to figure out and understand what's going on in this part of the business? And you're presenting that together, kind of like shoulder to shoulder, it will boost your credibility and your success significantly. Again, I don't think I can talk about data enough here. So, okay, the next thing that we're going to shift to is talking about the 7 different types of COOs that are out there. Chuck, this would probably be a good time to check in and see if there are any additional questions before we pivot to that.
All right, group, any questions for Tasha? I don't see anything in the chat. TJ says, totally agree on loving data as numbers do not lie. That's very true. Any questions?
I had a question, Tasha. It's Alicia here. Really, I love this presentation so far. I work currently in a PE-backed firm, and I feel like we took the company from privately held to PE-backed. Well, we kind of have 2 PE owners actually. So
yes, I did
love
too.
your
It was
perspective
CNR
on
and
like
Goldman Sachs,
there's two.
yeah.
But like I feel like you've described our life for the last year. I feel very understood at the moment. So this is great. But I had one question in terms of pace. how do you ready the organization to handle the pace at which you need to operate at, which you described very well, with the, how do you just get the organization ready
I
to
think
operate
that
at that?
is, I'm really glad that you asked that question because I think in my experience, that's one of the hardest leaps for private equity to make is really they've got all these meetings and they're, very close with the CEO and they're all on the same page, but getting that message to trickle out to the rest of the organization is very challenging, especially if you have an organization with a couple hundred or more employees. And I think a couple of things that can be helpful is just to level set on what's the vision. I mean, everyone has to be just in some degree a visionary to where you say, all right, you guys, this is the goal of this organization. You are now going to be a private equity executive. That is a cornerstone in your career. So I always try to appeal to what is personally benefiting to that individual. If they have an equity position, then the alignment is already right there. There is a very specific financial incentive if they see this through. But I think also, I love this quote. We'll get a little philosophical. I can't remember which philosopher it's from, but it essentially says life is suffering. So find something worth suffering for. And so it's going to be hard. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. This is not going to be easy. We're going to have to make some difficult decisions. Everything is a trade-off. We need to come together as a team and be stronger on the other side of that than letting that break us apart. And just have trust in each other to do that. So I think level setting, like once that honeymoon period is over, it's like, this is really go time. And if you're letting that catch up to you, it's going to be very stressful. But once you go through it and you adjust to the urgency and the pace and you have a successful exit, it's one of the best wins you'll reflect back on for the rest of your career. So I think kind of painting that picture of where we're trying to get to and level setting, like I'm here for you and it's going to suck sometimes, but it's going to suck together and we'll get through it. I don't know if that's helpful or
Yeah, no, it is. It definitely is for the leadership team.
Yeah.
In our business, we have large multi-site like locations. So it's like, how do you get like the stores and the people working in the stores to under like they were like all of a sudden, wow, something's changed. The pace of change and the demands is really, ramped. And they don't always, they're not as always as, get some of the benefits of the being a private equity back. So it's just kind of getting them how
It's
to
over
how to articulate that and get them the what's in it for me, right? It's not as clear to them as it is for, at the
Yeah.
leadership level. So
Yeah. The over communication helps. If you feel
Mhm.
like you're repeating yourself too much, then you're probably almost saying it enough.
Yeah. Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Helpful. Thank you.
yeah. Okay. So, I'm not going to go through all of these 7 types, but I think the key takeaway here is think about when people ask you, what is your job? Do not tell them your title. Your title is not what you do. I think the better question is, what is the job that you were hired to do? And what does the business need from you today? So if you think about the type of executive you are now, which of these categories resonates the most with you? And which of these categories is the business going to need in the future? And that is going to help you be strategic with your networking, your initiatives, what you prioritize. I can tell you, and I can't remember if I already said this, but I say it a lot. If you take a COO, they will fail in 95% of other businesses. And the reason why is because as the second in command, you're really just coming in and fitting into like solving for the biggest need. That's the most urgent problem in that business. And your skill set is perfect to do that. And so you could have a COO who manages inventory across 100 locations and thousands of employees. You could have a COO in a SaaS business with no product that HR and sales rolls up to them. Those are not the same people at all. They're very different. And so how you articulate your value and what type of operator you are is actually, I would argue, the more important thing than your title. If I could go back to my 20-year-old self, and give myself advice, I would say you should spend time building your network every day, even if it's only for 5 minutes. If you think that you're doing a great job and you're an amazing performer and you get to the end of this journey and you've put some really amazing numbers on the scoreboard and you think that's what's going to get you noticed for the promotion or the next job, you will be very disappointed when you get passed over for promotion or you find yourself in transition and you're trying to apply for roles, which in this environment is a very soul-sucking experience, trust me, from all the people I talk to. Your network is the most important thing that you take with you from role to role. And I want you to think about your network visually. If you were to like close your eyes and imagine what are the clusters of people that are in your network? And I just put in here for today, you got your company, the PE firm, and then I didn't have enough time to put a bunch of different clusters, but let's say there's a client cluster, there's a vendor cluster, there's an industry luminaries cluster. Um, where are the most influential people sitting in this network? And I want you, before I go into this next part here, to think about in your business today, who is the most influential, powerful, admirable person that you know, and why are they like that? So I am just about to graduate from the Chief Revenue Officer program at Wharton. And we just covered this idea of the Panama Canal in one of our last sessions. So I thought I'd share it with you here. The Panama Canal does not own the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, but the power of the Panama Canal is that it connects those. So if you were to look at this grid of the network, the power seeds are the people who connect disparate clusters of networks together. That is why people pay executive search firms the fees that they do, because our value is that we connect disparate clusters of networks together and fill a need. And the more that you can position yourself as the Panama Canal, that's what you want to do. That is how you gain influence. The next part of this is you can even think about this in terms of your company. So you have operations, you have finance, you have sales, you have, there's a lot of functions. They did a study and they found that the people who get promoted the most are the people who have the most connections with other departments, because it's more comfortable and human nature for us to like stick with our clique and do what we do. But thinking of the people in your network that you know that are a lot more influential than you are, do they sit in the cross sections of some of these clusters? Are they going to those industry events and bringing in new information to the organization? And probably one thing that I'll share is, and this is just kind of my own mindset as well, is I don't believe that circumstances happen to you. I believe you create your circumstances. And your role as an executive is to build the circumstances that you want in the company, not be a victim of it. So if you go to a conference, how can you use that information for your business? If you have a mentor, which if you don't, you should have a mentor outside of your business, how can you leverage that knowledge, that system, that process, that network to improve the business that you're in today? That will only exponentially improve your value as an executive. My final slide is really going to talk about some of the tactics with networking. I've probably built my network more in the last 12 months than I have in the last 12 years. And so I've learned a lot from that. And it's not just LinkedIn followers, it's relationships with people that I can call and text and say, I need some help. And they'd be like, I'm right there. And people who I would need that at some point. So I'm going to go through that as my final part here, but I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions that they want to pose before we go into that section.
This is really helpful. And you're spot on. The people who make the connections enterprise-wide are always the superstars.
I see you're using organizational network analysis. I recognize that those clusters, it's something that I had done in our past consulting life. And so good to see that you're an O&A. Are you geek level O&A?
Chuck, last night I did a quick image search for clusters of networks or interconnected networks, and this is just what came up. I would like
Oh,
to be a
okay.
geek in
Go.
that space, but I'm not, I'll let you take credit for that.
So everyone's homework assignment from today is to go look at organizational network analysis, and you'll understand that you have a shadow organization within your organization, and those are power brokers within your organization. They hold those prime connector spots. Sometimes they're negative power brokers. They're the ones that spread the gossip negatively, and they try to collect information, and they want to be the source of that. And sometimes they're operating against what the leadership team is trying to do. So just that's homework for this weekend if you get bored this weekend.
Great. Okay, so the last section here that we'll talk about is I end up talking to a lot of candidates who are really trying to strategically position themselves for their next role, and they may already be in transition or they're just thinking about it. So one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen people make is taking a concerted effort to network when they need it. Building your network before you need it is the most important thing when it comes to relationships. So they say, you know, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And so I would, for my 20-year-old self, I would implement systems and strategies so that I could do networking. Even if you're a fan of Atomic Habits like I am, even 5 or 10 minutes of networking outreach. Oh, I'm just going to send a note. I haven't thought it's been a while since we connected. Hope you're doing well. What's your address? I'd love to send you a Christmas card. Hey, will you connect with me? I see we have mutual connections. It's been a while. So, so I think small things that you can do will culminate and have more impact over time than just being like, I'm going to spend this month networking, because time is the biggest variable here. And also being more strategic. So we all have very limited time. We're all very busy, have a lot of demands on us professionally and personally. Think about, don't just network like spray and pray, but think about strategically, what do your clusters look like today? And where are the gaps? What are the people that you need to know? You're only probably 2 or 3 connections away from those people. And I think the other thing is a lot of people have some hesitations around networking. It makes them uncomfortable because we like to be around like-minded people. We like to be around people that we know. We're going to go sit at lunch with people that we know more than a total stranger. But I take this for granted because I am in a sales role and I love sales. And to me, it's just the natural way of things. But if I send out 100 requests to meet with somebody and I get 2 people that say yes, to me, that's big win. I am really excited to talk to those 2 people. And I think a lot of other people, they'll send like 10 requests and only, 0 people will respond. And so they get really demotivated. And I think pushing through that and saying, hey, this is not personal. It's just, is it the right time? It's just like, don't make it about you. It's probably nothing to do with you, honestly. And then, again, just getting a little philosophical. My dad was an entrepreneur, and a long time ago, he told me that life is like a balance scale. So on one side, you have what you get, and on the other side, you have what you give. And one of the big things that he shared with me is if you focus on the side of what you get, your life will always be out of balance. But if you focus on what you give to others, your life will always fall into balance. And I have found that to be, as a teenager, that was really lost on me, but I have found now with more life experience, that is 1,000% true. And so when you go into these networking conversations, if you go in with the expectation of this person's going to offer me a job, they're going to introduce me to a person, they're going to share all of their intelligence with me just because I asked, you're probably going to create some awkwardness in that scenario. But if you go into that conversation with, how can I understand what the goals of this person are? Is there any way that I can provide value to them, either with my expertise or sharing knowledge of things that are coming up, or my network, helping them that way? Is there any way that I can provide value? And once you do that, I have found that more often than not, if you're providing enough value in a conversation, that person will actually turn and say, Tasha, what can I do for you? And I don't even have to ask. And of course, I already know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, this is my goal. If you know, and we go through that. And it's one of the best ways that I've been able to build my network. And then the last thing I'll talk about is your brand. This really makes people clinch up very uncomfortably to think about, I'm not an influencer. I don't want to post videos. Like I've seen people do that and it's very cringe and it doesn't land well at all. And I am not that person. I hate posting actually. All my LinkedIn posts, I really don't like. It's very time consuming. I personally find value in it, but the key thing here is you don't have to be an influencer to be influential. Your brand is built in quiet moments. Your brand is really the culmination of what people think and say about you to other people when you're not in the room. And again, going back to my own philosophy of I believe you should create your circumstances, not be a victim of them. And so would I want to leave what my personal brand is up to other people that I might not know that well? No, that doesn't make me feel comfortable. I want people to know exactly how to think of me. And so I do very specific things. I tell certain stories. When I talk about the business that I was in, I'll talk really quickly about the data points. Storytelling is one of the best ways to gain credibility. But if I tell you I was a PE-backed executive, you're like, okay, that's fine. But if I tell you I was a PE-backed executive with a company for 11 years, and we went from 200 million to over 900 million, all of a sudden you have more, it carries more weight. And so think about what are your stories and what are the key metrics that you can sprinkle into that to just solidify your brand. What do you want to be really known for? And so with that, I think we're in a good spot to end. I'm also going to have Chuck send you one of my favorite HBS articles that's related to networking. So you'll be getting some of that information. And then probably the best way to stay connected is by sending me a connect request on LinkedIn. And that's Chuck, I'll turn it back over to you and the rest of the forum here.
Yeah, wonderful. So if we could, let's give Tasha a big round of applause. Send her into the weekend with some clapping. Thank you so much, Tasha. That was very enlightening. I think we could have made this a 4-hour session and maybe multiple 4-hour sessions. We'll have to talk about that. Maybe there's something there. Thank you all for attending today, and more importantly, thank you for taking time out of your day to work on yourself and to build your skill sets. That's what we do at the COO Forum, and that's what makes all of our members so special, is being committed to improving ourselves as leaders. We have, I guess, just a few things to just real quickly. We have next, is it Friday already? Is it the 4th? That can't be the next. It is. I think it is. So yeah, Friday, April 4th, we have Prasanth Nair to present on Into the Zone. Some of you, if you've been around for a few years, we'd love to bring Prasanth back. He's got a little update on his presentation this year that I think you will not want to miss. So that's next Friday. Hope you can join us. Did I miss anything? Anyone want to send us away for the weekend? Anything? Chris, anything to shut this meeting down? I'll put it in your hands. How's that? I'm putting them on the spot.
Wow, I just want to say, enjoy the weather out there. Get outside. Spring has sprung. Get some sunshine on your face and enjoy yourself.
Oh, that's perfect. I could not have done that any better, Chris. Again, thanks, Tasha. Thanks, Fiona, for getting things set up. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.